I'm going to be turning my attention back to this 1300 crossflow engine. I have to undo some of my recent work.
Take a couple of steps back before moving forward.
Debris just behind the spring there.
The rockers are operated by these push rods.
Look how clogged up those water ports are. There's a lot of debris in where the pistons are, but we do have 4 pistons, so that's a good thing. All right, so I've turned the engine stand around because there's one thing that I wanted to do when I was assembling this engine that I wasn't able to do. Absolute mission is ruined. Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Marcus Hayes, and unfortunately the weather is atrocious in this part of England today, so I'm going to spend my afternoon in the much drier climate of my dad's garage, and I'm going to be turning my attention back to this 1300 crossflow engine that I was hoping by now to have fitted into the engine bay of Heidi, my hearing aid beige Mk2 Escort. Granted, I was distracted recently with some issues on INSTA, my ST170 powered Mark 1, and I'm going to have to spend a bit more time on her over the next few days because there's a meet in Southend that I want to take her to. And don't worry, you're not having deja vu, it's a separate meet in Southend. So fingers crossed I get her ready for that event, unlike the last event at Southend, which was awesome, and yeah, I'm still gutted that I missed. Anyway, back to Heidi's engine, which has had a fair bit of my attention since I acquired it. I've cleaned up and painted the block and head. I also replaced the core plugs, and whilst I was in there, I managed to dig out a lot of the crud inside the water jacket. And yeah, I've been cleaning up and painting some parts, changing some gaskets, and that sort of thing. But whilst I was assembling this engine in a very recent video, it became apparent that I'd been very naive to assume that I could just change a few gaskets, paint a few bits, and throw the lump in the hole. And I'm going to have to take a couple of quite big steps backwards. Now, I'm going to get to that in a minute, because first I want to send a massive thanks and a shout out to my friend Dale, who has kindly donated some parts for this engine. So over here I've got the exhaust manifold that came with the engine that's really badly pitted, and although I don't think there's any holes in it, I was hoping to find a nicer one. And my friend Dale brought this round to me the other day, and as you can see, this is in way better shape. He's also included the little ring that goes in there, I assume, when you hook it up to the exhaust, and he's also given me an alternator bracket, because the bracket that I got with this engine was for a dynamo, and yeah, I want to convert it to run an alternator. And Dale confirmed that this bracket here, which is like the adjuster bracket, is not going to be any good for an alternator. This is one for a dynamo, and unfortunately Dale wasn't able to find me the curved type one of those brackets that I'm going to need for an alternator, so I still need to source one of them. But I want to send a massive thanks again out to Dale. Really appreciate you digging these bits out for me. Now, he also gave me a bolt that he was sure would fit this hole here, which is you know, the bolt I need to hold this breather box onto the block. But unfortunately, I seem to have lost it. The bolt was basically screwed into a bit of cardboard that was, I think, hooked onto this cable tie. And somewhere between bringing this manifold around here to the garage, I've misplaced that bolt. But hopefully it's at home on the table or something, fingers crossed. And then I'll be able to add that bolt to all these bits that need to go to the zinc platers. Really should have took them by now. I also still haven't taken this flywheel back to see Carlo at AR Valley Precision Engineers to get him to finish skimming it. Of course, if he's able to drill out these snapped off studs. But right now, I'm going to have to undo some of my recent work and take some of this lot apart again. Sad times.
I wasn't overly happy about taking Heidi's engine back apart, but as you'll hear in a minute, it's definitely necessary to take a couple of steps back before moving forward.
Alright, so just before I put the rocker cover on this in a recent video, I found loads of little bits of debris that looked like plastic. And loads of you guys got in touch to tell me that that was probably the valve stem seals, which apparently aren't plastic, but when they get old, they go brittle like plastic. Now, the valve stem seals are basically behind the spring here, and they go around the stem of the valve, hence the name. And I can clearly see some more of that debris just behind the spring there.
So you guys were clearly absolutely right, and I'm going to need to change the valve stem seals. Now luckily I've already got a set in here with my gasket kit, and I've already got a head gasket as well, which I'm going to need. Now Jonathan, who's been on the channel before with his very famous red Mordor Mk2 Escort, has very kindly offered to basically give Heidi's cylinder head a bit of a rebuild, or that's what I thought. What he's actually offered to do is explain the process so that I can do the work. So, you know, I'm always up for trying new things, and I'm sure with his guidance, I'll be absolutely fine. He is a proper engineer, and he's actually been doing a bit of surgery on his Mark II lately. So I'm hoping while I'm down there to have a look at what he's been up to, and of course, show you guys. So I'm going to continue digging until I've actually got this cylinder head off the engine. And seeing as I've taken it apart again, I may as well put it back together looking a bit better than it did the last time. So I'm going to ask my plater if he doesn't mind polishing this thing up a bit better for me, because he's got a proper polisher. And I might see about getting the inlet manifold either vapor blasted or blasted with the glass beads. I'm going to get in touch with my friends at Microblast Services in Windsor, because they do glass bead blasting as well as sand blasting, powder coating, and they also do Cerakoting, which will be perfect for this exhaust manifold. Now, we'll leave Microblast Services links in the description for any of you guys out there that need any sand blasting, bead blasting, powder coating or Cerakoting. And massive shout to Sam and Alan from Microblast Services if you're watching this video. I'm still at the moment determined not to completely rebuild the carb. And a lot of you guys have been saying that I should switch to a twin choke Weber for this setup, but I'm really not bothered about power or anything like that. If that carb runs, then I'll just be happy that I can run the original airbox and yeah, make it look nice and original and simple. And yes, the head bolts will definitely be zinc plated. I love a bit of zinc. I continued the teardown by removing the studs and nuts for the manifolds. And then it was time to remove the rocker assembly, which opens the valves in the cylinder head. The rockers are operated by these push rods, which is why these engines are often referred to as pushrod engines. The push rods are controlled by the camshaft, which is actually in the bottom end of these engines. The push rods must go back in the same order that they came out, so I used this bit of cardboard to keep them in the correct order. Undo the cylinder head bolts half a turn at a time in the reverse order to that shown in figure 1.41 on page 51. So the reverse of this. Once I was sure that the head bolts were fully cracked off, I used my gun to finish them off. Then after a quick tap with the rubber mallet, I could lift the head off of the engine. Alright, so there it is, the underside of Heidi's cylinder head. We can pull the head gasket off. And yeah, look how clogged up those water ports are. So that's another good reason to take the cylinder head off. And I've had a couple of you guys actually get in touch with me and suggest that I take the cylinder head off to make sure that those water galleries weren't blocked, because of what you guys saw when I when I took the core plugs out to replace those. But yeah, other than that, you know, this face needs a good clean. These valves are going to get relapped back in, and yeah, that should be good. As for the block, there's a lot of debris in where the pistons are, but we do have 4 pistons, so that's a good thing. And it doesn't look like any of them are broken. Yeah, they've got these sort of cutouts, I assume, for the valves. But yeah, they do look like they're all intact. And yeah, I'm just going to give that a thorough hoover out at some point. Obviously need to clean this gasket face so it's perfectly clean. But I'm not going to worry about that today. I want to spend some time, you know, off camera doing that another day. I will just put some microfibers over there to stop any more dust getting in. But yeah, hopefully next week I'll be able to take this cylinder head to Jonathan's. I'm guessing that going through the process of rebuilding the head is going to probably chip the paintwork that I've done, but that's absolutely fine. I can give this another repaint before I refit it. That's not an issue at all. And yeah, Heidi's going to be getting a fresh cylinder head. Alright, so I've turned the engine stand around so that I can turn my attention to the rear of the engine. Because there's one thing that I wanted to do when I was assembling this engine that I wasn't able to do. And I was just going to send it and not bother, but seeing as I'm ripping the engine apart again anyway, I may as well do that job that I wanted to do. I am of course talking about replacing this rear crank seal or rear main seal, which I learnt when I was assembling this engine can't be changed without removing this cover. And then that means that I'm potentially gonna ruin the gasket for the sump that I replaced recently, because yeah, the sump screws into the cover here. The sort of back 2 bolts from the sump screw into this cover rather than the block. So yeah, I'm going to remove this cover to change this seal. Now, one of you guys got in touch to say that based on the fact that the stem seals have gone all brittle and hard, probably where the engine hasn't been run for years and it's just been sitting, then there's a good chance that the rear main seal would have also gone brittle, and it's basically inevitable that it's going to leak. So yeah, I'm going to remove this cover and replace that rear main seal. If I do mess up the sump gasket, then I'll order another one and I'll just redo the sump gasket at a later date. I haven't got a spare sump gasket with me at the moment, but you never know. You know, because this engine hasn't been run, I may get away with not ruining the sump gasket, but I don't think so based on the amount of sealer that I put on the gasket when I did it. And I am actually going to loosen all the sump bolts to do this anyway, and that's because when I refit this cover, I don't want the pressure of the sump making this not sit on, you know, dead central, or, you know, making it difficult for me to get this on and make sure that this bit is level with the block. That's definitely an issue I found when I did the front cover, which I wrongly fitted after the sump. So I think, yeah, by loosening all the sump bolts first, there's going to be less tension on, you know, this cover when I'm trying to fit it back onto the engine. So that's my theory anyway. Let's crack on with it. Once I've loosened all the bolts on the sump, I then remove the rear seal carrier. I reckon that might go again. Obviously have to clean all this sealer back off, got to clean any traces of the old gasket off of here, but I think we'll clean up the block first. I used a microfiber cloth to prevent debris getting into the sump, and then I scraped off all the old seal carrier gasket and then gave the block face a sand. I removed all traces of the old sealer from the curved part of the sump flange, and then I started removing all traces of the old gasket and sealer from the seal carrier. I used a hammer and screwdriver to carefully remove the old seal from the carrier, and then after a quick clean, I greased up the brand new rear main seal, and I was actually able to press it into the carrier by hand, making sure that it was pressed all the way in. After a quick sand on the gasket faces, the carrier was ready to fit, so I grabbed the Kent Europe Silly gasket and started applying it to the new gasket. I smeared the sealer with my finger to make sure it wasn't too thick, and then I stuck the gasket to the block before adding another load of sealer on top of it. I then applied some sealer to the curved part of the sump flange and then greased up the crank. Refitting the seal carrier was a bit of a struggle. I found it difficult to actually slide it onto the crank, and in the end I was only able to get it on without the black rubber part of the sump gasket fitted. It was clear that I was going to have to lower the sump down considerably to get everything back together. So it was time to take another step backwards by removing most of the bolts from the sump. Alright, definitely having a bit of a mare, but what I've done is I've removed all the sump bolts except for the very front ones. So there's literally one on each side at the back. And now I think I'll be able to pull this sump down enough to get this seal in there. Yeah, this is not the right way to do it at all. With the sump now out of the way, I could refit the seal carrier, and with the bolts barely nipped up, I checked it for alignment with the bottom of the block and adjusted it accordingly with a hammer and screwdriver. Once I was happy, I tightened the bolts up further, fitted the black seal and made sure it was interlocked with the cork gasket either side, and then bolted the sump back on. I'm guessing the rear seal cover is that rear sealing ring carrier, 13 to 15 foot-pounds, and then the sump is 6 to 8 foot-pounds. Alright, well that was an absolute mission. I knew it was going to be difficult trying to do it without completely removing the sump, but I didn't know it was going to be as difficult as it was. I'm definitely going to order another sump gasket and just redo that, because this bit of the gasket here, the cork, is ruined, and where the cork gasket meets these, you know, black rubber pieces, that's where they're more prone to leak. They're the bits where you have to get it right. You know, the little rubber seal's got like a little groove in it for the cork gasket to sit inside. So yeah, I don't want to risk it, especially seeing this is at the back of the engine. It'll be a nightmare to change when the engine's in the car. So I am going to redo the sump gasket, but you know, I'm glad that I've managed to change this rear main seal. You know, I won't have to do that again. And I know this looks messy with all the sealer, but you just won't see it when the gearbox is fitted, so I'm not worried about that. And yeah, I did add a load of sealer on the sump gasket while it was hanging down, and because I'm going to redo it, I don't need to worry about tidying that up now. I'll let that dry, and that'll be easier to clean off when I inevitably redo the sump gasket. So there's Heidi's engine, looking in an absolute state compared to when I started this afternoon, but it's all for a good cause. You know, now we've taken the cylinder head off, you can see how some of the coolant ports were clogged up, so you know, they're all going to get cleared out, and ultimately the stem seals are going to get changed on the valves, which is, you know, really desperately in need to be done, because yeah, they've just broken up, and you know, I saw even more debris in there, you know, behind the valve spring. So massive thanks to everyone who helped me identify what that debris was. I was really puzzled, but you know, it is clearly the valve stem seals. Got to send another massive thanks out to Dale for giving me those bits, really appreciate it, and thanks in advance to Jonathan. I'll be round very soon, and yeah, you're going to let me loose refurbishing Heidi's cylinder head. I'm sure I'll be fine with your guidance. Now, I'm actually currently working on another video on Heidi, which I was planning to put out before this one. In fact, I was planning to put that out before the last video as well, but yeah, I just haven't been able to finish that video because I keep coming round here and the weather is poor. So yeah, that should be next on the channel, and it's a video that I'm quite excited for you guys to see. We're adding some more bling to Heidi, put it that way. But for now, I'm going to end this video here and have a bit of a tidy up in here before it gets too dark to do so. But as always, massive thanks to everyone who has tuned in. If you did think this video was any good, please do give it a thumbs up and a share. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Click subscribe if you're new to the channel. Feel free to follow me on Facebook, TikTok and Instagram. Check out my website for merchandise and car parts. Oh, I'm doing a sale on the winter hats at the moment. If you just type in the discount code WARM at checkout, that's WARM, you'll get 20% off of the woolly hats, but they are very low in stock numbers, so definitely be quick. Massive thanks as always to my patrons for your ongoing support. I'll leave all the links to everything in the description along with my email address for anyone who wants to contact me. But other than that, until next time, thanks for watching.